We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not.
Denmark is warning that NATO itself could break apart.
If the USA chooses to attack another NATO country militarily, then everything stops.
Greenland's leaders are issuing rare, unified statements rejecting outside control.
Nobody's going to fight the United States over the future of Greenland.
European governments are scrambling to calm things down. And all of it traces back to one idea, that the United States might try and take Greenland. Not partner with it, not lease it, just go take it. Today we're breaking down how that idea went from absurd to alarming.
I would like to make a deal, the easy way, but if we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way.
And what it tells us about where global politics is heading. Spoiler alert, it's not looking good, it's not looking good. A cold place, hot rhetoric. So before we even get into Trump, let's talk about Greenland. It's the world's largest island, but home to just about 56,000 people. Most people live along the coast in smaller communities scattered between mountains and fjords and ice. There's a lot of not roads. You travel by boat, plane, helicopter, or dog sled, very cool. A large percent of the population is Inuit, and for most of its modern history, Greenland has been treated less like a country and more like a distant outpost. Not saying that's right, kind of, yeah. Greenland was colonized by Denmark in the 18th century, folded into the Danish kingdom and governed from thousands of kilometers away. After World War II, as decolonization swept the world, Greenland's status slowly changed. First becoming part of Denmark in 1953, then gaining home rule in 1979, and eventually self-government in 2009. I know it's a history lesson, but it matters. Today, Greenland runs most of its internal affairs, but defense and foreign policy still sit with Denmark, a setup that reflects history more than it does geography. So with that in mind, Greenland has always been strategically useful to someone else. And from a military perspective, Greenland sits in a uniquely sensitive spot between North America and Europe, right at the top of the Atlantic. Now, during the Cold War, it became a forward lookout. It was like a place to spot Soviet missiles coming over the North Pole. Or maybe Santa, I don't know, it depends what you're looking for. That's why the US still operates Vitefik Space Base in the island's northwest, tracking missile launches and space activity to this day. Also, I'm so sorry if I pronounced that wrong, I really tried. But now add climate change. The Arctic is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the planet. Ice that once made the region inaccessible is retreating. Shipping routes that barely existed are opening. Minerals once locked under ice are becoming reachable. In other words, the Arctic is turning from a frozen buffer into an ocean you can totally navigate. And where new oceans open, power follows. Trump frames all his crazy Greenland shit as a security emergency, warning about Russia, China, and rival influence creeping into the region.
Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place.
Basically, he thinks everyone else is gonna wanna get Greenland, so he should get there first. Now, I would totally forgive you for thinking this Greenland thing came out of nowhere. Trump first mentioned buying Greenland in 2019, a proposal laughed off by Denmark, Greenland, and like everyone else. He revived it in late 2024, calling Greenland a national security necessity. In 2025, US officials publicly criticized Denmark. A pro-annexation envoy was appointed, and by January of this year, after a US raid in Venezuela, Trump openly said,
"We need Greenland."
But actually, what's very interesting is the United States has thought Greenland mattered for a very long time. As early as the 1860s, just after buying Alaska, US officials floated the idea of acquiring Greenland as part of a broader Arctic expansion. After World War II, Harry Truman offered Denmark $100 million in gold to buy the island outright. Denmark said no, and the US accepted that answer. Instead of ownership, the two countries settled on something else: access. For a while there, Greenland became a critical part of America's Cold War posture. The US built dozens of bases all across the island. massive radar systems, early warning stations, at one point, even nuclear weapons. But then the Cold War ended, the Soviet threat faded, and the US didn't get kicked out, it left voluntarily. Most of those bases were abandoned by choice. Greenland faded from public view, not because it lost importance, but because it no longer felt urgent. Which makes Trump's renewed fixation, special interest on Greenland feel kind of different. He's gotten too confident. His advisor and famously bald person, Stephen Miller, said, "Nobody's going to fight the United States over the future of Greenland." Then, with no regard for any sort of world order, Trump starts dismissing leases, dismissing treaties, dismissing even 100-year-old agreements. In his words,
You defend ownership, you don't defend leases.
so what about those resources, huh? Because yes, Greenland does have them, and they matter a lot, actually. They matter heaps. Big part of this. Under Greenland's ice are rare earth minerals, the stuff that goes into electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, and advanced weapon systems. Yay! Right now, China dominates the global rare earth supply chain, especially processing, which has turned these minerals into a genuine national security issue for the US and for Europe. Greenland is sexy and appealing because it could help diversify supply away from China in a politically aligned region. And we all know how much these American tech overlords would love to get their grubby little hands on some rare earth minerals for their weird phones and shit. Not saying names, but come on. There's also uranium, which matters for nuclear energy and defense. There's also deposits of iron, zinc, and lead used in manufacturing and infrastructure. They got some good shit. Scientists believe there may be oil and gas offshore, but extraction would be expensive, slow, and fiercely opposed, so that's more of a speculative than an imminent. But knowing America, even the promise of maybe some oil is probably enough for them to show up and overthrow a government or something stupid, am I right? They love oil! What's interesting though, is they honestly wouldn't really need to invade Greenland to get in on its minerals. Hear me out. Greenland's government has repeatedly said it's open to foreign investment, including American investment, on its own terms though. In fact, the US has already quietly stepped in to block Chinese mining and infrastructure deals in Greenland using diplomatic pressure. So yeah, the resources are probably a massive part of this, but they don't explain the fixation on ownership. They explain why Greenland is valuable, they don't explain why access isn't enough. Which leaves us with a bigger question. If Greenland is that important, if the US has wanted it before, if climate change is reshaping the Arctic, what is actually stopping Trump from taking it? The deal that already exists. Like I said, the United States does not need to buy Greenland or go get it, doesn't need to seize it or anything. And it does not need Denmark's permission to expand its military presence there. Thanks to a little-known defense agreement signed in 1951, the US already has what experts describe as a free hand in Greenland. The agreement was struck right at the height of early Cold War paranoia, when both Washington and Copenhagen feared Soviet forces moving across the Arctic. And the language on this thing is pretty expansive. Under this pact, the United States is allowed to construct, maintain, and operate military bases across Greenland, house American personnel wherever needed, control landings, takeoffs, and movement of ships and aircraft. One Danish defense researcher said, the US has such a free hand in Greenland that it can pretty much do what it wants. Another added that Washington could literally get everything it wants if it just asked nicely. And even though Trump thinks you can just throw money at everything, Denmark cannot even legally sell Greenland. Under current arrangements, Greenland's future is decided by its own people, who have the right to hold a referendum on independence. And polling shows around 85% of Greenlanders oppose an American takeover. Shockingly, they don't want J.D. Vance there. Greenland's premier is not into the whole thing, saying, "Our country is not for sale. Denmark's Prime Minister has publicly reminded Washington that the US already enjoys wide access under the existing defense agreement and urged the Trump administration to stop issuing threats. Such a professional way to say, like, can you just fucking leave us alone, bro? You're being so weird right now. If Trump is genuinely worried about Greenland's security, he's not, and the legal framework already gives the US sweeping access, why hasn't he used the agreement that already exists? What this is really about. So what have we learned so far? The US already has access to Greenland. This makes it pretty obvious what this is. A power grab, and a gross one. It's a stress test for alliances, for international law, and for how power gets exercised in a warming world. Denmark has warned that any US attempt to seize Greenland by force would effectively collapse NATO because it would mean one alliance member attacking another. NATO only works if borders inside the alliance are treated as, don't get that. Once that breaks, everything downstream becomes unstable. That's why European leaders, including France, Germany, Britain, Italy, Poland, and Spain, have issued rare joint statements backing Denmark and Greenland, reaffirming that only Greenlanders can decide Greenland's future. Russia and China are watching closely, just not in the way Trump suggests. They're not just flying around all the time. Russia has already militarized much of its Arctic coastline. China, a non-Arctic state, has tried to gain influence through investment and research, calling itself a near-Arctic power. Neither is positioned to take Greenland, but both benefit if Western alliances fracture, which is ironic. By threatening annexation, Trump isn't deterring rivals. He's creating uncertainty that they can easily exploit. For Greenland itself, this moment is tough. Global attention increases its leverage, but it also reinforces a long-standing fear that Greenland is seen less as a society and more as a strategic object. Greenland's leaders have been clear about what they want next, which is dialogue, not threats, investments and not ownership, and cooperation, not absorption. They're open to business. They are not open to being claimed. So what happens now? Let me know what you think in the comments because your guess is as good as mine. Bye!